What's up, meta nerds? This video is all about slug-throwers. Slug-throwers weren't your regular blaster rifle, because instead of energizing Tabana gas, turning it into a plasma, and firing a blaster bolt, slug-throwers actually fired a solid projectile called a slug. Your average slug-thrower pistol only had an effective range of about 60 meters, but a slug-thrower rifle was said to be able to hit something at 300 meters. But it should be pointed out that this is an incredibly short range, with even Civil War weapons shooting much further. That being said, professional assassins, or tribes like the Tuskan Raiders, knew how to customize and produce slug-throwers that had a much greater range than the mass-produced, cheap slug-throwers on the black market. And it's said that some bounty hunters and Tuskans were known to be able to pick off a target from over a mile away. The firing rates of slug-throwers varied immensely, ranging all the way from bolt-action single-shot weapons up to slug-thrower miniguns. And there was also great variation in the slugs themselves, with ammunition being made out of metal, ceramics, or even extremely hard plastic. But this is one of the slug-thrower's biggest drawbacks, in that ammunition was actually much harder to find than blaster gas was. But on the flip side of that, many bounty hunters and primitive people preferred the slug-thrower because you could craft your own ammunition, whereas you couldn't really just produce your own Tabana gas, and therefore you'd have to be dependent on other people to make sure that your weapon kept firing. Another advantage that was specific to bounty hunters was that these solid projectile slugs could not be deflected by a lightsaber. Blaster bolts were just high energy balls of plasma, and so these would ricochet off of a lightsaber. But with a slug thrower, the user knew that these rounds couldn't be deflected back at them, and worst case was just that the Jedi's lightsaber would melt the round. But if the bounty hunter was lucky, the caliber would either be too big or moving too fast, and it could go right through the lightsaber and right into the Jedi. And there are also different types of ammunition, like rubber rounds which would just work to stun the enemy, but also explosive rounds which could set a place on fire. A clever thing that a lot of bounty hunters would do is stack these different types of rounds in their clip so that they would start off with the non-lethal rounds, knowing that if they could bring their target in alive, they'd probably get paid more. But if that wasn't working, they could just keep firing until they got to the real metal slugs, and if their target's armor was too strong, the bottom of their magazine contained those explosive rounds. If you weren't sold on a slug thrower yet, perhaps one of the most life-saving aspects to these weapons is that they were much more reliable due to the fact that they were much more easy to field strip than a regular blaster rifle, with some accounts of blaster rifles stating that they get jammed up in the sand, or their circuitry gets messed up in the swamps. But the simple moving parts of a slug thrower were easy to take apart, clean, and reassemble on the go. And what's really ironic is that the rise of blasters actually increased the usefulness of a slug thrower. Body armor had advanced to the point where it could stop physical rounds, but even some of the best armor could not stop a direct hit from a blaster. This resulted in many people not wearing armor at all, figuring it wasn't worth the trouble or the cumbersomeness that came with wearing such bulky armor. Some famous slug thrower manufacturers were Sarka Arms, Mur-San, and Oriolanis. One of the most famous proponents of a slug thrower was Kemain Jai Shilal, or as he's more commonly known, General Grievous. His species, the Kalish, mostly relied on slug throwers throughout the Huk War. Aurra Singh was known to carry a slug thrower, as well as Jazzy Mari, the niece of Sugi. Lando Calrissian was often seen with one, and perhaps the people most associated with the slug thrower were the Tuskan Raiders. Their very unique slug thrower, called the Tuskan Cycler, was often used by these very capable warriors to shoot stormtroopers right in their helmet lens, or in a vulnerable area right around the neck. The true mark of a Tuskan Raider sharpshooter would be if they could take out a pod racer pilot when they were zooming around the track during the Boonta Eve Classic pod race. Well, that's it for the slug thrower, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. As a nod to Star Wars, the science fiction work Farscape also uses the term slug thrower to describe more primitive guns which either used compressed gas or chemical explosives like bullets. Now, two of the biggest advantages of a slug thrower that I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that snipers preferred them because they didn't leave this bright laser bolt trail when fired, but also slug throwers have an amazing advantage in the fact that they can shoot right through shields. Remember that walkers are used because any solid object can go through a deflector shield. And so although that protects you from blaster fire, it does leave you very vulnerable to a bounty hunter's slug. But just in case you were thinking about picking up a slug thrower and trying it yourself, bounty hunters that use this weapon always had to do their homework. Because a slug thrower actually fires a projectile, its trajectory would be determined by the density of the atmosphere and that planet's gravity, two variables that were constantly changing from planet to planet. Well, that's it for the slug thrower. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and be sure to leave a comment down below if I missed any cool facts, or if you have a suggestion for future videos. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at MetaNerdsLore, so you can see us build Star Wars props and cosplays, along with some other cool Star Wars stuff. If you want to help support this channel, check out the description below for our Amazon store and our Patreon. And be sure to subscribe, because we're making videos like this every single day. But more important than all that, remember, Don't bring a personal shield to a gunfight, and the Force will be with you. Always.